So our 2024 hunting season has been a really good success. We got a moose in Quebec. I got that. We're now into the deer hunt, and my friend Charlie, who I've hunted with all my life, all my adult life, well, he's not giving me any chance at all to make this thing park. He's got 3 bucks, so we party hunt. Kathy still has a tag, so we've got lots of meat for us. We'll be giving lots of meat away, and I thought today what I'd do, I had some people ask to do a tutorial on how we field dress a deer. So I'm going to try to do it as if someone's never done it before. What we try to do is to bring the carcass out whole, the guts in. We found through the years that field dressing it the sort of typical way, you're dragging it through leaves and debris and needles and mud. If we can possibly get it back to our camp, with the guts in, we find that we can produce a carcass that's almost hair-free. And I'm going to show you how it's done. I almost forgot. This procedure is both bloody and graphic, so viewer discretion is advised. So once again, a big thank you to Charlie, 3rd buck this year. Thank you, the guys run with horseshoes. And Mother Nature for providing us our winter's meat. So the first thing I'm going to do, well, after I roll my sleeves up, is I'm going to make an incision in the back leg at the hock area where we're going to hang it from the gambrel. You want to be very careful in this procedure that you don't cut that tendon, because it's going to make the entire procedure a whole lot more difficult. One thing to watch out for here is the tarsal gland. That's the scent gland of the deer, and if you cut into that, you're going to taint the meat somewhat. And as I mentioned, this tendon in the back here, it's very easy to cut. Like with a sharp knife, you just threw it like butter. However, in its longitudinal direction, it's very strong, and it's going to assist holding the deer in place while we do the whole procedure. So I'm just going to make a single slit right here for the gambrel. Okay, you can see here the tendon I'm talking about, so we have to be very careful as we're taking the skin around that we don't sever it, and it doesn't take much. I speak from experience. Okay, so for clarity, I'm going to turn the carcass a number of times to show my procedure. But so I had to make horizontal cuts here, so there's a little bit of hair right where I made those cuts. But any cut you can make that's in the direction of the grain of the hair, you're not going to get hair on it. And essentially, what it's called case skinning. We're going to pull the hide off the carcass like a sock, and we're going to have a little bit of hair, but not very much. So I'm going to make a small incision right in the center of the leg, and I'm going to cut up again with the grain of the hair. Up to my horizontal cut in the hock. And then you're going to see how easy this comes off. Again, I have to be at this point still very mindful of this tendon, because if I break that tendon, it's going to be hanging from one leg. Again, that's going to make it extremely awkward. So at this point, I've got to remove the reproductive parts, and you don't have to worry about urine or feces. When I get to taking the guts out of the animal, then you have to be careful that you're not hitting the bladder, and I'll show you how we're going to do the anus after. So basically, we're cutting this guy off. This is what attaches the hide to the carcass. And because we tan the hides, we don't want to get a whole lot of buttonholes or even slices in that hide. They don't turn out so well. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the blade at basically 90 degrees to the carcass and just cutting that membrane as I pull, and the hide comes off like a sock. Okay, at this point I've come to the tail, so there's a series of small vertebrae. You don't need a bone saw here, you just got to find a separation between the vertebrae and cut through it, and then the hide is able to be pulled down over the rest of the carcass. Right there, you can see the small vertebrae in the tail. So I've severed that, cut through that little bit of meat, and on. So Charlie and I over the years have done it different ways, but we found the last few times the hardest part, and you're going to see, is fleshing out around the front, not fleshing out, but taking the hide off the front elbows of the legs. So I'm going to raise it up now. I'm going to get the head and saw off the front legs, so it's less problematic when we get to pulling the hide off. There's another tendon I spoke about first that can be dried in the sun. Natives would use impact implements, stone. They'd smash it into fine fiber, and then they would twist that into things, and it's certainly strong enough for bowstrings and 50 or 60 pound bow. The other part that natives use, and I'll get to it when I get the hide off, the major sinew used for sewing or bowstrings, whatever, comes off the very back of the animal, called silver skin, and it's even stronger than the sinew that comes off of these tendons. This is definitely not a round ball out of a flintlock musket. We have the exit hole here. I think Charlie may touch the front left shoulder, so there might be some meat loss there. There will be none in this area. Of course, most of this brisket we throw away. Should point out too, this guy is really ready for winter. He's got a lot of fat on him. Bob Miller made me some candles that he actually rendered down this, because you don't want to eat deer fat. It's like putting a spoonful of peanut butter in your mouth. It sticks to the roof. But I thought they were going to be really smelly candles. They produce great light, and they didn't smell as sweet as a beeswax candle, but they were pretty good candles. So something else you can do with it, and or you can feed it to the birds. Birds like it. So I'm about to get into the yucky part, but before I do, I'll just show you the silver skin that I talked about earlier. You get rid of some of this fat off this guy. And you can see that material here. It's sort of glassy looking. There's still some membrane on it, but that's the silver skin that they use to make their bowstrings from. I might as well get rid of some of this fat. We're already going to feed that to the birds. So before I make the incision to remove the guts, I'm going to cut around the anus, and then I should be able to, once I've made my incision, I should be able to pull that colon right through the animal. It's worth noting, a lot of people think they need some kind of a big old Bowie knife to skin an animal. That's about the ideal size blade. And although in our modern world, my friend Charlie, he's probably shot as many deer as he is old. He's my age. He uses a Swiss Army knife, and that's all he uses. I got even got the moose I got this fall with a Swiss Army knife. So anyway, you don't need a great big honking blade. In fact, I find it detrimental. They just seem to get in the way. Okay, so now the yucky part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a small incision here, and then I'm going to use 2 fingers to pull that skin away so that as I slice down to the sternum in here, I don't actually puncture. It's going to be messy enough because I think with that exit wound, we've done some damage inside. I don't think it's damaged much meat though, but I don't want to get all those guts cut open. So small incision here. And I'm in. So you can see the opening I've created. Now I'm going to use 2 fingers like this. I'm going to put my blade in behind it. And I'm going to work those fingers down as I go, pushing the guts of the animal into the interior. And now I'm at the sternum. So I stop. So like any mammal, there's a membrane inside the animal that keeps all of our organs attached. Same inside our bodies. What I want to try to do is get the bladder out of it without cutting it. Okay, get the bladder is out. Now the colon I should be able to pull right down through. Now to start on the membrane that holds everything in. Here's a good example of what the membrane looks like and what you're looking to feel for. It's clear like a pane of glass, and that's going to be through the entire carcass. It's quite easy to kind of pull as you're working that membrane, freeing up the guts of the animal. I should point out too that the best cut on any animal is its tenderloin. So there's 2 muscles in any mammal. One runs down the inside of the spine, that's the tenderloin. One runs down the outside of the spine. We call that the back strap. And so those are the 2 best cuts of the meat. So when you're taking this membrane out, you should be careful that you're not cutting into that real choice piece of meat. So as messy as this looks, Charlie did me a favor and he missed the guts. What we're looking at here is the liver. And what I have to do is the diaphragm is actually attached to the lung. So as I get that membrane out of the internal cavity, I've got to cut off that diaphragm where it attaches to the lungs and everything will spill out. And sometimes this can be a little bit yucky. And is traditional in a lot of hunt camps for the meal when you harvest a large game animal is to have heart for supper. Okay, we have the 21st century modern convenience. They have in a plastic tub where I just basically dump it on the ground. You can do this anywhere. You can get a rope up across a limb on a big tree, do it right in the field, but we brought this guy back to the camp and we're using that guy. So the next thing I'm going to do is get the bone saw, and I'm going to open that sternum up. We want to get the meat cooled as quickly as possible and spreading that open. I also tend to cut some of this brisket off because it's just too tallowy to eat, and then it allows us to get in and clean up the cavity. So I've got through the sternum with the bone saw. I'm going to cut a little bit of the flesh here where I can get at that esophagus that we talked about, or that we don't want to spoil our meat. And that would be the esophagus. Now the temperature is ideal. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup of the inside. I'm going to flush it with fresh water. Temperature is going to be right tonight for hanging it. We do our own butchering. I'm going to show how I sort of quarter it tomorrow. Once it's stiffened up a bit, it's a lot easier to cut the meat. And yeah, we'll be having deer heart for supper. I'm going to get the bone saw now, cut through the pelvic bone, and get out the rest of the organs and clean up the area between the two hind quarters. So there you have it. That's essentially how we dress our big game animals. Moose is an exception. They're just too big. You got to quarter them. We tend to skin them and drop the hide down on the ground. Use it like a tarp to keep the meat clean. Worth pointing out, it doesn't matter how good a quality knife you got. Cutting through that deer hair will dull a knife. It's like we used to butcher hogs, and the rind of a hog, about 8 cuts, we sharpen it. So you got to keep it sharp to do a proper job. And now I'm on to fleshing this hide, and eventually it'll be brain tanned and become clothing. So not as cold as we would have liked it last night. It got down to around freezing, so the meat stiffened up. We find that we always butcher our own. And we find that if you can get a little bit of cold night on it, that it stiffens up. It makes cutting the meat a lot more consistent. So right now I'm going to take off these side bits, give me, and I'll save this for burger meat or stew meat, and that'll give me access into the tenderloin, which is the best cut of the animal. So I'm going to break from my 17th persona a bit. So you can use things like hand-forged long knives, as long as they got a stiff spine and they're fairly thin. Any of smaller, thinner blade will work. But I'm going to cheat here. We find that we waste less meat by using a modern filleting knife. A lot of people are intimidated to butcher their own deer, or moose or elk. They spend a whole lot of money at abattoirs that they don't have to do. It's pretty straightforward. So the animal, just like our own anatomy, it's divided into muscle groups. And that silver skin I talked earlier about on the back of the animal, used for sinew, there's a muscle group there. And once you start to cut into that, I'm not doing it till we get it off the gambrels, but it's easy to separate those major muscle groups. And if you're really keen, you can get a chart that shows top round, bottom round, sirloin, and you can cut and label them as such. We tend to take roasts if we want them,
cut a lot of it into steaks, especially the more tender parts of it, and wrap, label, and freeze it. So the tenderloin, there's a muscle right here. It's a muscle that defines the tenderloin right there. And that meat on the outside is rather tough. That's going to end up being stew meat, this portion. And this part here is the best cut on the carcass. So we're going to find that spine and follow it along. You can sort of feel it. Again, that's where the filleting knife comes into play. My friend Charlie had a friend there once who was a butcher, and he said if it's done properly, there shouldn't be enough meat left in the bones to bait a mousetrap. Anybody that's filleted a pike is taking that chunk of meat off the type of the pike and trying to avoid those Y bones. You sort of put your knife in and you feel them as it goes along, like running on a zipper. And it's sort of like that, just along the vertebrae for the tenderloin. And there we go, one tenderloin. And often I'll clean the fat and stuff off of sections of meat I'm taking for roast and stuff. I leave everything on that tenderloin. It's too much of a risk to damage the best meat on the carcass. So we're just going to wrap that up, mark it with a T, and it's ready to go. Some might say too good for company. And there we have the second tenderloin. Now we're going to the next best cut on the carcass, and that would be the muscles that run along the outside of the spine, called the back straps. We always cut them into steaks personally. We cut them about an inch or inch and a half thick, and we just label them chops when we put them down. So again, I'm going to start up here. Here's the muscle group coming like this. This is not part of it in this area, so I'm going to get rid of that. That goes for stew. That's going to go for stew. And we're going to start up here where the muscle starts. And again, we're just going to feel along that vertebrae of the back of the animal. And where you see this separation here, that's sort of the separation of the tenderloin into a different muscle. So we're going to take that down here. So. And now I'm feeling along, once I'm in, I'm just feeling along the ribs of the animal. And there we have one back strap. No bone to cut through on the front quarters. You have the scapula bone, and it's just membrane to take off the front shoulders. So the next step I've done, so I got the tenderloins out, I got the back straps off, I got both front shoulders off. I'm going to cut through the backbone now because I'm not going to damage any of that good meat. Separate front from the back. Then we're going to take it inside because this is awful. Nasty weather, starting to rain on us. Usually we have snow this time of year. I'm going to find a spot, get rid of all the fat and the meat in the bone sections, and get the bone saw and cut the front half off.